The day I pulled a $5,000 electric bill from my mailbox, I realized my HOA had just picked the wrong electrician to mess with. Let me set the scene. I'm standing in my driveway, boots crunching on loose gravel, still carrying the scent of sawdust and a long day's honest work. The same hands that have wired up nearly every house on this street are now shaking in fury, gripping a piece of paper that feels like it's about to wipe out my daughter's future. $5 grand for power in a home where I switch off every single light the second it's not needed, just to save every dime I can for Sage's college fund. What these HOA bloodsuckers didn't count on is that I've been in the electrical trade for 3 decades. I can sniff out power scams from blocks away. And if you try to pull a fast one on someone who knows exactly how every wire in this neighborhood is run, you just handed them everything they need to bring you down. That taste of rage hit the back of my throat as I saw the sprinklers across the street sputter to life funded by our HOA dues while they were literally siphoning off electricity behind our backs. What would you do if your HOA tried to drive you into financial ruin overnight? Leave a comment if you've ever dreamed about standing up to petty tyrants, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm Dalton Reed, third-generation electrician. My grandfather trained my dad, and my dad taught me. I've been running wire through walls since I was 16, but this story isn't just about wiring houses, it's about wiring up justice. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died in a car crash that flipped my world upside down. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. Kind of ironic, since I'm the one who actually wires up the lights. The insurance payout was sizable, but every dollar felt like it came soaked in guilt. Sarah always dreamed our daughter would get the chances she never did. So there, standing at her grave, breathing in the sharp scent of flowers and damp soil, I made a vow. Sage would go to college, no matter what. That's how we ended up in Pinehurst Estates, a place so pristine it looked digitally enhanced. You know the type: lawns trimmed with surgical precision, homes polished to a mirror shine, and an HOA that swore it was protecting property values but really just meant, we're going to micromanage your life and charge you $180 a month for it. I bought a humble ranch-style place, nothing flashy. Just a clean, safe home in a good school district. A spot where a teenage girl could worry about homework, not whether her dad was losing it. Then came Cordelia Blackwood, HOA president. Full-time nuisance. Imagine every nightmare HOA story you've ever heard, then add a business degree and the warmth of a tax audit. She drove a white Lexus with vanity plates that read Horain, and yes, she thought that was clever. She literally measured grass height with a ruler like she was prepping for surgery. She wore khakis just to walk to her mailbox, and her version of good morning felt like a court summons. Her house was a giant colonial with a circular drive, and she treated the rest of us 846 homeowners as if we were lucky to exist in her empire. At first, I followed the rules, kept the yard neat, paid dues on time, and kept my head down. It almost felt normal: the sound of kids laughing, the smell of burgers on the grill. Then I made the first misstep. After hearing about some local break-ins, I put up a simple security camera, just enough to keep Sage safe when I worked late. Cordelia, of course, slapped me with a $150 fine for an unauthorized exterior modification. But when I actually read the 847-page HOA covenant, yes, I went through the whole thing. Security systems were clearly allowed. So I walked over to her house, calm and civil, hoping for a rational conversation. But standing in her marble foyer, listening to her heels echo like a ticking bomb, I realized reason wasn't on the menu. Interpretation is at the boards. Discretion, she snapped, arms folded, like I'd dragged a mud-covered generator through her foyer. That was the beginning of what I now call death by 1,000 citations. Every week brought a fresh violation. Grass was 3.2 inches when the rule was 3.0. Mailbox color was matte black instead of semi-gloss. Garden hose too visible, even though it was coiled neatly beside the house. Each fine, $150 plus a $25 processing fee. My housing expenses skyrocketed. And each time another envelope showed up with that dreaded HOA logo, I watched Sage's smile fade just a little more. But that was nothing compared to what came next. The electric bill. Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., a process server showed up looking like he wished he were anywhere else. He handed me a thick manila envelope while Sage was making breakfast, filling the house with the smell of butter and routine. The timing wasn't random. In bold red letters across the top, cease and desist. The letterhead said Pettin and Associates. I'd once heard that fancy lawyer letters were like expensive perfume meant to cover up something that stinks. This one reeked of desperation dressed up as legal authority. They claimed I owed $5,247.08 in electricity fees, to be paid within 10 days or else they'd slap a lien on my property. Penalties were already accruing, like some HOA loan shark deal gone sideways. Through the kitchen window, I saw Cordelia 3 doors down, sipping coffee from bone china, smirking like she'd already won. But what she didn't know was I had already started putting the puzzle together. Back when I was apprenticing under my dad, he taught me a lesson I never forgot. When someone accuses your electrical work, don't argue, investigate. Electricity doesn't lie even when people do. That advice had served me well over the years. It was about to pay off again. So I did what any good electrician would do. I went straight to the courthouse. The place smelled like old paper and stale coffee, and reminded me of studying building codes back in the day. What I found made my pulse spike harder than a blown fuse. The HOA had never officially filed the electric policy change. I knew from a nasty contractor dispute years earlier that rate hikes require 60 days notice and majority homeowner approval. Emergency powers don't apply to someone's pottery side hustle. Then my instincts kicked in full force. I pulled the clubhouse's utility usage for the past year and the numbers were screaming theft. A 340% usage spike in 6 months for a building that mostly hosted bingo and birthday parties. Time to make a call. Jake Morales and I went through trade school together 2 decades ago. I rewired his kitchen last Christmas. He reads meters for the utility company. That evening, we met in the Home Depot lot where the smell of fresh lumber always clears my head. Jake reviewed the numbers. "This ain't right, man," he muttered. "That clubhouse meter's pulling juice like it's running a factory, not a community center." We agreed to meet back there that night. Midnight in suburbia has its own home AC units, streetlights, the occasional transformer pop. We rolled up on the clubhouse like a pair of electrical detectives, flashlights in hand and decades of experience in our heads. Behind a decorative hedge, we found it. A hacked-together jumper cable setup, illegally rerouting electricity outside the main meter. The work was messy, unsafe, and criminal. Worse, the meter had been tampered with faked readings to make it seem like the clubhouse was burning through kilowatts like a steel mill. "This is felony-level stuff," Jake muttered, snapping photos. "Someone was stealing power and making the whole neighborhood foot the bill." That's when everything clicked. Cordelia's online pottery business. The industrial kill I glimpsed through her garage window. The sudden spike in shared electric bills right when her shop started pushing professionally fired ceramics. Then my phone buzzed. "Pay up or lose your house." 9 days left. I looked at Jake and, for the first time in weeks, actually smiled. She'd just handed me the blueprint for her own downfall. Because petty tyrants always make one fatal mistake. They underestimate people who know exactly what they're doing. When you back someone like that into a corner, you don't get surrender. You get a masterclass in revenge. Cordelia Blackwood was about to learn what happens when you steal electricity from someone who's spent his whole life making sure it goes exactly where it should. Game on. Thursday morning's ambush came dressed as red tape. I was in my shop, breathing in that familiar mix of metal dust and electrical tape glue, when the doorbell rang with impatient purpose. Through the peephole, I spotted a city inspector gripping his clipboard like it was a life raft. Randy Kowalski had worked code enforcement for 15 years. He knew a setup when he saw one. "Sorry about this, Mr. Reed," he mumbled, not meeting my eye. "We got 3 separate complaints yesterday. Something about commercial vehicle storage and unauthorized business activity." Perfect timing. Sage was at the kitchen table, buried in set books. Her shoulders tensed the moment she heard the conversation. 3 complaints. I asked, already guessing who sent them. "Filed within an hour of each other," Randy said, flipping his notes. "Cordelia Blackwood, Patricia Hendris, and Robert Fitzpatrick." That's when I knew she messed up. See, I'd rewired Patricia's kitchen a year and a half ago while she was in Florida taking care of her dying mom. Bob Fitzpatrick, he just had hip surgery. Guy could barely sign his name, let alone fill out complaint forms. But somehow, their signatures showed up on documents filed yesterday. Right on cue, Cordelia showed up at my gate. Clipboard in hand, smug grin locked in place. "Inspector Kowalski," she purred, "I trust you'll be thorough." We must maintain our residential standards. Randy gave me a look. He knew this script, but rules were rules. So we walked through my garage workshop. What he saw. Exactly what you'd expect. Neat, safe, nothing out of the ordinary. 220-volt residential setup. Same voltage as a dryer or air conditioner. Installed correctly. Permits in order. This is standard residential work, Randy announced after checking the wiring. All code compliant, properly grounded. Nothing commercial going on here. I watched Cordelia's expression flicker. Like a light bulb right before it dies. She'd been counting on a blatant code violation that would leave me no choice but to tear down everything I'd built. What she got instead was a free crash course in the distinction between real building regulations and imaginary HOA overreach. But she wasn't done playing her cards. What about insurance? Cordelia pushed, her voice growing tight and panicked, like water sneaking into faulty wiring. Surely, she argued, keeping work tools at home would invalidate residential coverage. Now, that was a clever angle, incorrect, but clever. I'd looked into that exact issue back when I was first setting up the workshop. Insurance companies, much like electrical faults, tend to cause trouble at the slightest excuse, but personal use home workshops are explicitly covered by standard homeowners insurance as long as you're not mass-producing products or stashing dangerous materials. Randy calmly laid out the facts, while I watched Cordelia's expression shift through all 5 stages of bureaucratic denial. She'd spent weeks assembling this elaborate setup, faked paperwork, synchronized complaints, all to find out that following the law generally works in favor of people who obey it. Mrs. Blackwood, Randy said with the tired tone of someone who danced this dance with her before, unless Mr. Reed starts producing circuit breakers in bulk, his setup is entirely legal. Randy left, inspection report in hand and nothing out of order. I sat in my workshop, replaying the sequence in my mind, thinking about patterns, signals. In electrical work, you solve problems by tracking the evidence. Shorts always leave a trail. Overloads always stem from somewhere. Cordelia's actions were starting to reek of something deeper than just an overzealous interest in pottery. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. Remember those utility readings? I need the full archive, to years back. Every spike, every oddity. Jake's response crackled with energy and purpose. We going nuclear? Not quite, I replied, staring at the circuit sketch I'd been drafting while piecing it all together. This is precision work, because if I'm right, Cordelia isn't just skimming electricity. She's been orchestrating a full-scale fraud operation for years. No more defending. Time to trace the real circuit, one wire at a time. Then came the foreclosure notice, delivered with the accuracy of a missile, aimed straight at my daughter's future. I was helping Sage prep for her big interview in the kitchen, the air thick with her nerves and bitter coffee, when the doorbell rang in that unmistakably deliberate cadence reserved for official business. I spotted the process server through the window, double-checking both his watch and our house number. The kind of punctuality that screams psychological warfare. Emergency board meeting results, he said, handing over the legal envelope like it was radioactive. A lien had been filed, $12,847 in accumulated violations. We had 48 hours to respond, or face foreclosure. Sage went pale like a flipped breaker. Her most critical college interview, State University, engineering program, was starting in 8 minutes. The timing, not accidental. It was surgical. As I skimmed the documents, Sage locked herself in her room, trying to hold it together on her call while her world collapsed on the other side of the door. The emergency board meeting had supposedly taken place Tuesday night. Votes cast unanimously by Patricia Hendricks, Robert Fitzpatrick, and Cordelia Blackwood. Patricia, who was still in Florida caring for her dying mother. Robert, who'd spent the last 6 weeks high on post-surgery meds, barely coherent enough to write his name. Cordelia's panic had made her careless. Among the so-called violations was a complaint about unauthorized high-voltage industrial machinery creating a safety threat, referring, of course, to my 220-volt tools. Back in trade school, they drilled it into us. High voltage starts at 1,000 volts. My setup, about as dangerous as a dryer. Any half-competent lawyer would laugh this out of court. But what really grabbed me was the math. What began as maybe $800 in questionable citations had bloated into nearly $13,000 through mystery fees, administrative charges, and emergency assessments. Loan shark level creativity. While Sage wrapped up her interview, Trying to fake optimism, I headed straight for the courthouse. Time for some real investigating. The scent of old paper and the faint scratching of pencils took me back to nights spent studying electrical codes. Only this time, I wasn't troubleshooting voltage, I was chasing criminal intent. What I found made my hands tremble with fury. The emergency meeting violated every procedural rule on the books. State law requires 48 hours written notice before any lien-related proceedings. The minutes showed only Cordelia's signature. The others, forgers, obvious ones, same loops, pressure, and flourishes I'd seen on other documents, but the bombshell was buried deeper. Cordelia had filed a mechanics lien with fake invoices for emergency electrical work in shared areas. Contractors that didn't exist, jobs that never happened, timeframes I could easily disprove. Back home, I found Sage crying over her calculus notebook, her victory eclipsed by our looming disaster. That image, my brilliant kid's dreams under attack, sparked something sharp and immovable in me. That's when Harold Morgan knocked on my door with a manila folder that felt like deliverance. Harold and his late wife, Maria, had been among the original residents of Pinehurst Estates back when the HOA protected homeowners rather than exploiting them. Maria had meticulously documented every meeting, every budget, every vote for over a decade, keeping the files like a professional archivist. Found these after you mentioned the forged signatures, Harold said, easing into a kitchen chair. Maria kept records of everything, literally everything. Inside the folder were our original governing documents, the HOA charter, bylaws, and clauses that made Cordelia's recent moves not just unethical, but flat-out illegal. Turns out, the original rules required majority homeowner approval for raising dues, annual audits, and tightly restricted emergency authority. Maria's records showed the last legitimate board election happened 3 years ago, during a Christmas meeting attended by only 12 people, far below the 50% quorum required. Cordelia's presidency, entirely illegitimate. Every fine, policy, and emergency decision she'd made since then was null and void. But Harold wasn't finished. He produced bank records Maria had obtained before she passed, enough to make any prosecutor salivate. Over. For years, thousands were siphoned from HOA accounts into Blackwood Ceramics LLC, coded as neighborhood expenses. No pool work done. No landscaping completed. Lawyers never hired. Total theft, $127,000. Then Harold dropped the real nuke. Maria's final file, gathered just weeks before her sudden heart attack, contained photos of illegal electrical connections, linking the community clubhouse to Cordelia's private kill. She'd discovered meter tampering, spliced power lines, and a rigged system that funneled stolen electricity to power her pottery business at the expense of 847 neighbors. She was going to reveal everything at the next meeting, Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. Then she died. And I didn't have the strength to continue, but seeing what Cordelia is doing to you, Maria would never let it go. I stared at the documents spread across my kitchen table, every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every crime suddenly forming a clear circuit diagram in my mind. Cordelia hadn't just targeted us. She'd been running a full-blown criminal scheme for years. My phone buzzed. 47 hours left. I looked at Harold, something hard and final locking into place inside me. You know what? I said. She's right about one thing. In 47 hours, someone's going to lose everything they stole. No more playing defense. Time to flip the switch. The final piece of evidence, the nuclear core, was hidden in a shoebox beneath Maria Morgan's bed, wrapped like heirloom china. Harold had called me at midnight, voice shaking. You need to see this now, he said. Maria left something. It changes everything. His kitchen was a war room, papers spread across counters, old coffee thick in the air, tension crackling like static. I couldn't sleep, he confessed. Kept thinking about what you said about patterns, about theft. So I dug again. Really looked. What he found would have made the FBI salivate. Maria hadn't just archived records, she'd built a case. A criminal case. She'd used her access as treasurer to pull financial statements, snapped surveillance photos at dawn, and logged utility readings that made no logical sense. Then, the smoking gun, a manila envelope labeled "open only if something happens to me." Inside, proof that Cordelia's HOA presidency wasn't just flawed, it was fabricated. The election never took place. That Christmas week, vote by 12 people. Maria had verified the building was closed for renovations that entire week. She's been forging everything for 3 years, I said, feeling every connection click into place. Meeting notes, budgets, elections, all of it fake. Harold nodded solemnly. Every foreclosure, every fine, every policy, it's all fiction. We've been living under a sham regime. But there was more. Cordelia hadn't just stolen electricity for herself. She tapped multiple sources across the neighborhood: streetlights, pool equipment, even emergency fire systems, using her fake authority to mask illegal infrastructure. Look at these figures, Harold said, holding up Maria's spreadsheets. 6 years, 847 families, nearly $300,000 in theft and fraud combined. Cordelia hadn't just built a pottery studio on stolen power. She'd built a criminal empire that touched every home. And still Harold wasn't done. Maria had gathered news clippings, sudden deaths, mysterious departures among previous HOA board members. 3 treasurers gone from heart attacks, 2 others who raised questions. Moved suddenly after unexplained family emergencies. She thought she'd be next, Harold whispered, pointing to her final note the day before her death. She had confronted Cordelia, threatened to expose it all, died, and that night, she died. Natural or not, her death kept the scam going and sentenced our community to silence. Why show me this now? I asked, already knowing the answer. Harold's eyes burned. Because Cordelia's trying to do to you what she did to the rest: silence you, discredit you, or force you out. But this time, she aimed at the wrong person. As I stood over Maria's documents scattered across Harold's kitchen table, something shifted inside me, deep and irreversible. This wasn't about a utility bill anymore. It wasn't even about saving my home or ensuring Sage's future. This was now about holding Cordelia accountable for every household she'd exploited, every neighbor she'd silenced, every soul bruised by her calculated criminal operations. Harold, I said, collecting the papers with calm determination, we're not just exposing Cordelia's scheme. We're going to see her face federal prosecution for each offense she's inflicted on this community. The victim was no longer waiting for justice, they had become its instrument. My workshop crackled with a quiet rebellion, the smell of fresh coffee blended with sticky tape residue and the sharp tang of long overdue justice. At dawn, Harold arrived carrying boxes full of Maria's investigation like he'd just returned from the front lines. Sage converted my workbench into a high-tech command center. Her laptop buzzed while she mapped out patterns of fraud with the accuracy of a Swiss craftsman, the familiar scent of brewing coffee mixed with the aged wood and worn tools in my shop. As we readied ourselves to dismantle Cordelia's empire one wire at a time. All right, team, I announced, calling on 3 decades of experience diagnosing complex electrical messes. We're treating this like rewiring a home mangled by hacks, step by step, thorough, and absolutely foolproof. Mrs. Martinez joined the mission Tuesday night. Her paralegal skills turned out to be more effective than a truck full of tools. She organized Maria's findings with the precision of someone who'd made a career out of propping up lawyers and making sense of chaos into neat stacks any prosecutor would dream of. There are 4 legal cornerstones, Martinez explained with the confidence of someone well acquainted with justice that might be delayed but never denied: financial fraud, stolen utilities, election tampering, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. Any one of them could put Cordelia away. Together, they were uncheckable. Maria's crowning work was unraveling the financial crimes: bank statements revealing $127,000 siphoned through bogus community expenses, equipment for a pottery business bought with HOA money, luxury trips disguised as planning retreats. The trail was so blatant it was insulting. You'll want to hear this, Martinez said, pulling out sentencing charts. Mail fraud alone is 20 years per charge. Cordelia sent fake invoices through the U.S. mail for 4 straight years. That's potentially 80 counts right there. My own investigation into the electrical system showed just how massive the theft was. Jake Morales had supplied meter logs spanning 6 years. The data didn't just raise red flags, it defied physics. Cordelia's kins were pulling industrial-grade energy while nearby homes were charged for unused power. Most folks don't know this, I explained, sketching out the load equations that would have made my trade school professors proud. But high-temp ceramic kins can pull as much electricity as a factory, running several non-stop needs: industrial service, permits, and costs 10 times residential rates. Sage's internet sleuthing uncovered Cordelia's online empire. Blackwood Ceramics bragged about their commercial-grade setup and kill capabilities and had generated over $200,000 in sales. Reviews raved about the flawless finish only top-tier kins could produce. "Check this out," Sage said, showing me Instagram posts of the studio and expensive gear. She gave tour of this place, stuff that costs more than most cars, all funded by theft and powered with stolen electricity. The election rigging was practically cartoonish. Harold got hold of records proving the December election was a sham. The community center had been closed. The logs had signatures from people who'd moved out or died. "Democracy dies in the dark," Harold muttered, peering at fake names under my magnifier. But Maria tracked every lie, every manipulation. Our war room evolved daily. Mrs. Hendricks handed over financial reports from her short-lived role as treasurer. Jake brought in utility fraud reports that would auto-trigger a federal review. Martinez dug up similar HOA cases that ended in long prison terms. It hit me we weren't just putting together a case. We were crafting a blueprint for dismantling criminal operations masked as neighborhood leadership. Our plan revolved around one final confrontation. At next week's community meeting with real authorities present, Cordelia would face two paths: own up, repay what she stole, and accept judgment from her neighbors, or deny it all and face federal agents armed with damning proof. Why show mercy to someone who's never shown any? Sage asked, her teenage righteousness clashing with hard adult truths. "Because real punishment," I said, recalling my father's advice about both wiring and morality, "is living with what you've done. Prison takes her away, but shame and bankruptcy, that's justice served cold right here." Martinez nodded. "Prosecutors prefer restitution over incarceration. Restoring the community always outweighs destroying a single life." By Friday, our evidence could have put away a dozen fraudsters. 4 years of financial records, utility abuse affecting 847 families, fake elections that made banana republics look clean, victim statements from 17 families who'd been tormented. "1 week," I told the group. "That's when Cordelia Blackwood finds out what it's like when justice knocks." The apprentice had become the master. Class was about to begin. Monday, panic arrived in perfume and expensive stationery. Harold rushed in with a thick envelope branded by 3 law firms. Cordelia had gone lawyer shopping like someone trying to score a sketchy prescription. The cease and desist letter was laughable, like something out of a bad legal drama. It accused me of harassment, spying, and slander. I was still chuckling in my workshop, surrounded by honest sweat and sawdust, when Sage stormed in like a stormfront, laptop in hand. "Dad, she's having a total social media meltdown," she grinned. "She's been ranting every hour since midnight." Her posts were textbook self-destruction, claiming victimhood while admitting to running an unlicensed business, denying fraud while boasting about her pro-grade equipment. She was literally helping us build the case she insisted didn't exist. "Wait, look at this," Sage said, laughing as she showed private messages from Cordelia trying to rally supporters. Mrs. Patterson replied with surgical precision, "Cordelia, you took $3,000 from me with fake fines. Contact me again and I'll file a restraining order." The Hendricks family was blunter. "We know you faked our signatures. Expect to hear from our lawyer." Tuesday night, things escalated. Harold called during dinner, voice shaken with disbelief and fury. "She tried to bribe me," he said flatly. "Came to my door with $10,000, told me to destroy Maria's files." The image of Cordelia, clutching hush money, felt almost too on the nose. She handed me $5,700 in bills. Harold saw it. Still smelled like a bank vault. Hands shaking. Told me, "Think of the community, Harold." By Wednesday, Cordelia had abandoned all logic. She hired a private investigator who seemed trained by cartoon cops. He asked neighbors if I was stealing power or if Harold had lost his mind. It backfired spectacularly. People began sharing stories, realizing they weren't alone. Mrs. Rodriguez had paid $4,000 in fake fines. The Thompsons were out $2,800 in made-up penalties. Even newcomers shared horror stories about welcome packets full of threats. "She's accidentally united everyone against her," Martinez said, eyes sharp. "There's no glue like shared victimization under the same tyrant." Then it was my turn with the evidence that would shatter her final illusion. I stepped forward holding photos that would make any trained electrician sick with disgust. The familiar buzz of justice mixed with my own adrenaline as I prepared to lay out the case-ending details. Cordelia Blackwood has been siphoning electricity from this community for years, I said, flipping through images showing illegal wiring setups that broke every safety code in existence. Potterykins hooked into communal grids. Families unknowingly paying for power they never used. The photos depicted makeshift wiring, tampered meters, dangerous installations masked as legitimate community expenses. Back when I was learning electrical work, my dad told me, violations like these aren't just theft, they're potential manslaughter. Total value stolen, $89,000 across 6 years, I continued. Add in fraudulent meter readings that impacted 847 homes. That's interstate utility fraud. That's prison time. That's when Cordelia lost it. Her composure exploded like an overloaded fuse box. This is a witch hunt, she screamed, leaping from her seat. I added value, I raised standards. I built a successful enterprise while the rest of you bickered over weeds and fences. Silence returned, except for the soft hum of cameras rolling and the ever-present electrical buzz of recording gear, catching every damning word. Ma'am, I said evenly, like an electrician finally completing a long, messy fix. You didn't build a business. You built a criminal operation powered by stolen funds and stolen electricity. But she was too far gone for logic. Desperation arced off her like frayed wire. I worked harder than any of you. I created income, opportunities, something worthwhile. With money stolen from 847 families, Sage called out from the front row. Her teenage voice sliced through the chaos with crystal clarity. That's when the federal agent stood. His presence immediately stilled the room. Mrs. Blackwood, he said. Agent Patterson, FBI Financial Crimes. I strongly recommend you stop talking now. Cordelia looked around and finally saw the truth. 274 neighbors staring at her. No support, no escape. What do you want from me? She asked, voice breaking under the weight of exposure. I stepped up again, the calm precision of solved circuitry in my voice. We want everything returned. Every stolen dollar, full restitution, public confession, immediate resignation, and cooperation with federal charges. The room hung silent, like a live wire ready to spark. Only the soft clicking of cameras captured the exact second corruption met its reckoning. Mrs. Blackwood, I said, revealing my phone and starting a countdown timer for all to see. You have 60 seconds to decide between confession or prison. Tick, tick, tick. Time ran out in utter silence. Cordelia stood still, sweat pooling beneath her pricey suit. Her expression cracked like brittle insulation under too much load. She whispered, just audible over the sound of humming cameras and 274 hearts beating. I may have made some serious bookkeeping mistakes. Louder, Mrs. Martinez said firmly. Every family here deserves to hear you clearly. Cordelia's posture collapsed. I used HOA funds for my pottery studio. I rewired equipment without permits. I faked board signatures. I charged people for electricity they didn't use. That was enough. Agent Patterson nodded. Justice had officially begun. 20 minutes later, Cordelia signed restitution papers, in full view of federal agents and local cameras. $216,000 to be repaid. Immediate resignation, ongoing cooperation. Her criminal empire was officially dismantled. 6 months later, the transformation was astonishing. Her estate sold quickly to repay victims. The Kins were seized and auctioned, funding a community legal defense pool. The space once housing her illicit setup became a garden where kids now learn to grow vegetables instead of enduring fear. Mrs. Hendricks became the ethical leader we'd needed all along. Transparent budgets were published online. Violation notices came with warnings and appeal options. Property values climbed, not through fraud, but genuine community improvement. My electrical business flourished. People came from neighboring towns, wanting the guy who exposed a corrupt HOA with his own evidence. I began teaching electrical safety courses at the local college, helping families detect fraud before it ruins them. The best part, watching Sage thrive at State University, chasing a degree in renewable energy. She saw how electricity could serve or harm and chose to protect it. Her internship with utility fraud teams inspired her to study grid security. Our story spread nationwide. The dad who brought down a crooked HOA became a viral symbol of grassroots justice. 3 other communities followed our methods. Millions in stolen funds recovered, laws changed, annual audits required. Victims protected. The scholarship we funded in Maria Morgan's name helps students study law, ethics, and public service. Sage serves on the selection panel, making sure her late mother's legacy of truth and documentation lives on. 9 months after Cordelia's confession, I stood at Sarah's grave and told her about Sage's future. She wants to run for city council, I said. Maybe even rewire democracy itself. The experience taught me, protecting your family sometimes means facing the fights you wish you didn't have to. But true leadership means confronting injustice no matter how messy. Cordelia eventually relocated, working quietly as a bookkeeper. That Christmas, she sent a card inside just a simple note. Thank you for teaching me what I needed to learn. Harold saw her at a store, seemingly relieved as if the weight of deceit had finally been lifted. Today, Pinehurst Estates stands as a beacon of transparent governance, attracting residents who believe in accountability. We celebrate our civic day by honoring those who speak up, knowing that democracy only works when communities stay vocal and united. Last week, speaking at a national HOA conference, I shared the core lesson from our story. Bullies count on silence. But when neighbors unite around facts and refuse to be intimidated, no corrupt system can withstand the force of truth. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about preventing the next victim and making sure criminals understand consequences are real when communities work together. Tonight, Sage and I are hosting a workshop for kids, teaching electrical safety. The sawdust in the air, the hum of questions from young minds, it's all part of building something better. She's sketching solar arrays that could make our neighborhood energy independent. Her books cover the same workbench where we once built a case that changed lives. Dad, she asks, want to help design a microgrid for our neighborhood? Always ready to learn, kiddo, I tell her, feeling the quiet satisfaction of circuits repaired, families protected, and a community finally rewired for justice. Drop a comment below with your own HOA story. You're not alone. Your voice might be the one that sparks real change. Knowledge shared is power multiplied. And justice, it flows just like electricity. Friday brought the most personal hit yet. I found my truck's tires slashed deep, deliberate cuts. The acrid smell of torn rubber mingled with morning air. This wasn't random. It was personal. The same cameras Cordelia once demanded I remove had caught everything. At 3 a.m., there she was, knife in hand, slashing tires with calculated rage, her face clear, her intent undeniable. She's completely snapped, Sage said, watching the footage. That's not strategy anymore. That's raw hatred. The attack moved things into felony territory. Destruction of property now part of the charge sheet. Jake confirmed the insanity. Cordelia had been calling the utility fraud hotline, accusing me of tampering with meters. The irony was so rich it deserved a museum exhibit. Saturday, she sent an all-residents email calling me a public menace. It was packed with lies and fake quotes accusing me of causing power outages, but the backlash was swift. Dozens replied, all to the full list, defending me and detailing their own abuse. She just documented years of neighborhood victimization. Martinez noted, federal prosecutors will eat this up. By Sunday night, Cordelia had racked up bribery, property damage, harassment, and defamation, all while we continued building our case. 6 days, I said to our team, feeling justice hum like current through copper wire. She's running out of shadows. Tuesday, Harold burst in, waving papers like surrender flags. She filed for bankruptcy, he gasped, claiming she's being persecuted and can't afford legal fees. I was mid-test on a breaker panel when the news hit, justice roaring louder than the equipment. The smell of scorched wire seemed to mirror Cordelia's unraveling world. Emergency Chapter 7, Harold said, spreading out the documents. Claims financial hardship. Lists her business as minor supplemental income. Says her assets are negligible. Sage looked up from her screen, grinning like a cat with feathers in her mouth. She posted selfies at her bankruptcy attorney's office with the caption, fighting back against neighborhood terrorists. The hypocrisy was thick enough to conduct electricity, but this was her greatest misstep. Martinez called, her voice vibrating with restrained excitement. Federal bankruptcy trustees will now audit every dollar she's touched in the last 4 years. She just invited forensic accountants to inspect all her crimes. The petition itself read like a confession. She called Blackwood Ceramics a hobby, despite years of denying she ran a business. Described her studio as modest, while photos showed industrial kilns sucking power like factories. She was confessing, in writing, to federal crimes while claiming poverty. Wednesday, the media got involved. Channel 7's Jennifer Walsh ran a primetime story titled "Broke HOA Tyrant Accused of Massive Theft," complete with victim interviews and footage of her illegal setup. Cordelia's response: a live interview claiming she was a successful entrepreneur crushed by jealous neighbors. She even gave a tour on camera of her illegal studio. "She's giving prosecutors everything," Sage whispered, still recording. "Those kids pull more power than our house. She's literally airing her guilt." Harold had noticed rental trucks pulling up to her house around midnight, apparently trying to move out pottery equipment before law enforcement could seize it, gear purchased with embezzled funds. Ironically, the same neighborhood surveillance cameras she once campaigned to eliminate had recorded every frantic attempt to hide those assets. On Friday, Cordelia staged her most unhinged maneuver yet. She called a public safety meeting at the library to address what she called ongoing threats from neighborhood troublemakers. It seemed she genuinely believed that local sentiment could somehow override a federal criminal probe. What unfolded instead was an unintentional victim impact hearing. Only 3 people came to defend her. In contrast, 22 families arrived, carrying documented proof of her long-running fraud. The library workers became unexpected witnesses to powerful testimony detailing theft, tampering with utilities, election interference, and years of targeted harassment. She had inadvertently organized her own victims into a witness lineup for federal authorities. Martinez, observing from a legal lens, commented with near reverence, "Most people facing prosecution try not to leave evidence. Cordelia was practically mass-producing it." By Saturday, news began to spread that her frantic tactics had done nothing but hasten her downfall. Her bankruptcy lawyer had dropped her case after uncovering the extent of her hidden liabilities. Utility investigators had sent formal reports to the FBI and the state attorney general. 2 separate mortgage lenders initiated foreclosure on properties she had used as unreported collateral. Then came Cordelia's final blunder, a mass email sent Sunday evening that would have moved a confessional priest to tears. She claimed she was temporarily leaving due to persecution but vowed to come back and reclaim everything she said was stolen from her. In doing so, she inadvertently admitted to evading jurisdiction and hinted at future criminal acts. Federal prosecutors would recognize this for what it was: clear evidence of guilt and criminal intent. "She just authored her own indictment," I said, "printing off copies for our records. Concealment of assets, flight risk, threats of repeat offenses. The kind of evidence prosecutors dream about." By Monday, confirmation arrived with the clarity and force of current flowing through a grounded wire. The federal bankruptcy trustee froze all her holdings. The FBI formally opened a criminal case. State officials prepared election fraud charges. "Tomorrow night," I told our group, feeling the same deep satisfaction as solving a complex wiring puzzle, "Cordelia Blackwood will face a final decision. Either admit guilt and make restitution or face prison and total collapse." Energy buzzed through the community center that evening, not from the overhead fluorescent lights, but from a crowd charged with purpose. 274 residents squeezed shoulder to shoulder. 3 news crews set up to document what would become the most explosive HOA meeting in U.S. history. I arrived early, soaking in the anxious energy, the scent of sweat, and the stale coffee aroma that tends to linger wherever democracy is about to reassert itself. My evidence binder felt heavier than any tool belt I'd ever carried, packed with everything necessary to restore a neighborhood's belief in justice. Reporters had already descended. Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 occupied the front row under studio-grade lighting. Local newspapers had assigned their best investigative journalists. In the back corner, a federal prosecutor quietly took his seat, elevating this HOA meeting into something much more serious. Cordelia's arrival was pure performance. She wore a sleek black designer suit that probably cost more than someone's monthly mortgage. Her attorney trailed beside her, eyes glued to his phone like he was waiting for a last-minute evacuation call. Cordelia scanned the crowd with a look that combined desperation with misplaced confidence, still convinced she could spin a story already beyond her control. "Before we begin," said Councilman Roberts, his voice echoing decades of experience in governance, "I want to make it clear that tonight's session is under observation by state and federal officials. All remarks are being recorded for legal purposes." Cordelia paled like frost creeping across a windowpane, but stood taller, ready to fight a losing battle. Mrs. Martinez was first to speak. Her paralegal background showed in the tidy stack of labeled documents she held. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to expose 4 years of continuous financial crimes committed against this community." An overhead projector displayed a stream of banking records that revealed astonishing theft. $127,000 misappropriated under bogus expenses. HOA money funneled into her pottery business. Lavish cruises disguised as leadership retreats. Every entry cross-referenced with irrefutable documentation, like the foundation of a textbook criminal prosecution. "She stole from every single person in this room," Martinez said, her voice cutting through the silence like a live current through copper wire. Cordelia's lawyer whispered frantically to her, but she didn't flinch, her eyes locked ahead as though watching her entire world disintegrate in high resolution. Next came Harold Morgan, presenting the election fraud evidence. His voice, long suppressed, rang out with long-awaited purpose. "My wife, Maria, kept records showing that Cordelia Blackwood's presidency was never legitimate. The elections were rigged. She's had no legal authority for 3 years. Every rule, every fee, none of it valid." The room erupted like a tripped breaker after years of electrical overload. Those who'd paid hundreds in phony penalties realized they'd been fleeced by someone who had no more power than any neighbor.